Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, independent financial advisor, owner of Elevation Financial. Thanks for joining me today. Glad you are here as always. Episode 102. I kind of blew past episode 100 without much fanfare, but I'm on episode 102 of the podcast. So good milestone. Having fun with it. I appreciate everyone who's a listener. If you have been a listener for a while and you like it, do me a favor, share it with someone. Send it to someone else. Maybe give me a review on iTunes, or I guess it's called Apple Podcast now. Anyway, I'd love for you to share the podcast if you don't mind. So thanks for listening. All right, today we're going to talk about lump sum investing versus dollar cost averaging versus recurring contributions. And there is some overlap between these things, and I'm going to kind of categorize them into three different areas because there is sometimes some I wouldn't say misunderstanding necessarily, but just some overlap in terminology and how they're used. And so this comes up sometimes in conversations where investors are kind of looking at, okay, what is the right timing to contribute to my retirement account or my investment account, whether it's a Roth IRA, investment account, a regular taxable account. The question often comes up, hey, how do I invest? Should I be doing big lump sums? Should I be doing monthly contributions? Is that dollar cost averaging? Should I do like one big annual contribution every year? When should I do it? All these questions come up sometimes when we're thinking about how do we contribute? How do we invest? How do we put the money into an investment? So let's talk about the differences. We're going to talk about what the data shows, and we're going to talk about the psychological aspects as well, and arrive at a conclusion that I think you will be happy with, because it will kind of relieve you of some stress or burden of thought here as we wrap it up. So let's talk about, first of all, the definitions here. So what is lump sum investing? So a lump sum investing is just kind of what it sounds like. It's basically taking a lump sum of money and dropping it in to your retirement account or your investment account. Let's say you have a windfall of $10,000 or X $1,000 sum that you've got sitting there for some reason. Maybe it was inherited, it was given, it was a bonus, you've saved it up, whatever the case may be. So you can have the option of just dumping all that in at once into an investment account. And that's what a lot of people do. They just take the lump sum, they dump it in, and that's kind of a simple way to approach it. Let's talk about dollar cost averaging and what the definition is of dollar cost averaging, which is kind of a different way of investing. Dollar cost averaging is the act of periodically investing a lump sum of money in little chunks, maybe monthly chunks, for example, over a period of time. It could be 12 months, it could be 2 years, 3 years. You take that lump sum, and instead of dumping it all in at once, you're taking periodic contributions and investing little by little with a consistent amount every month or every time period. This is also sometimes the term people use when they really mean just monthly recurring contributions. There's maybe no lump sum involved. Maybe the money's not even there yet. It's just, you get a paycheck every month, you put money in every month. And some people kind of use the term dollar cost averaging to apply to that practice, but that's not quite classically what it means. But again, it's a common term that's meant, that's used for monthly contributions as kind of a catch-all. So what should you do? Should you put a lump sum in at once? Should you invest big annual chunks, or should you do monthly contributions? Should you do a hybrid? Does it really matter? What should you be doing? So first, let's talk about what the data says. And we're going to talk about some data between different scenarios here. So according to, so what wins according to data? First of all, in general, most of the research you will find out there will say that lump sum investing wins more often under, quote, normal market conditions. So a market that is sort of behaving with not a whole lot of volatility, no big crashes. In general, most data shows that lump sum investing is going to win. By contrast, the data also shows that dollar cost averaging often wins more in volatile market conditions. So if there's crashes during that market period, lots of volatility, lots of ups and downs, then dollar cost averaging, or in some cases, recurring contributions as it applies to the context of dollar cost averaging, can win more often and give you a higher rate of return and perform better. The issue here is that the data always, or at least all the data that I've come across and been able to find, really uses the classic kind of windfall scenario of dollar cost averaging. The two scenarios they analyze are, let's take a big lump sum and we're going to contrast dumping it all in at once versus taking that same lump sum and distributing it out in periodic dollar cost averaging contributions over a set period of time. That's kind of the classic scenario that people compare. And so one example is this Vanguard paper put out by Vanguard, and it's called Dollar Cost Averaging Just Means Taking Risk Later. And in their study, they took a $1 million windfall and they calculated the average ending values from a 60-40 portfolio following various rolling 10-year investment periods. And what they found is that lump sum investing outperformed about 2/3 of the time. And specifically, when it comes to U.S. investments, the 12-month dollar cost averaging led to an average ending portfolio value of 2.3 million versus lump sum led to 2.4 million, approximately. These are approximations. And the actual rate of return was within less than 1%. So there was less than 1% difference between the two in terms of rates of return. So $1 million growing to either 2.3 million or 2.4 million. Now, obviously, the difference is a good chunk of money, but in the context of the amount of money we're talking about, it's fairly negligible. It's not really a massive difference. So what this study found was that most of the time, more specifically 2/3 of the time, the lump sum contribution would outperform the dollar cost averaging across a 10-year period in U.S. investments, at least. But again, the difference was negligible. It was fairly close. So let's talk about a real world illustration and what really happens in practice for most of us. So for most investment scenarios, we're looking at a recurring monthly contribution. We're not necessarily talking about a big windfall, a big chunk of money that's sitting in our lap that we're just kind of divvy out or lump sum. That's not the most typical real world scenario. The most typical scenario is that we are deciding, hey, let's say we're taking a Roth IRA, for example. Good old fashioned Roth IRA. Let's say you're under 50, your max is $6,000 per year you can put in as of 2021. So let's say you're going to use that scenario. The question then becomes, do I contribute $6,000 all at once, or maybe in a couple chunks and just kind of get all in there, maybe at the beginning of the year, maybe at the end of the year? Do I just kind of fill it up as quickly as possible and then forget about it? Or do I do $500 a month? And just like clockwork, just in the first of the month or the 15th of the month, do I plug in that $500 every single month and let that kind of play out? Which is better? Which is going to give me a higher return or better performance? So I ran some scenarios with some of my tools, and the tool I used in this case is called Portfolio Visualizer. There's a free version you can use to run scenarios like this yourself, and it's a really great tool for analyzing differences. And I ran a few different scenarios, and one example is I took a 10-year period from 2011 to 2021, and I looked at, let's say we start with $6,000, and I'm comparing it with, do we do it $6,000 annually, or do we do $500 a month each year? And so when it comes to the annual contributions, if we just do a lump sum every year, the ending balance after that 10-year time period was $159,631. Contrasted to the monthly contributions, if we, again, contribute $500 every month for that 10-year period, the ending balance was $168,989. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. $168,989. So I'm butchering this completely. Let me go back. $168,989. So basically, $159 versus $168, $100,000. So that's the difference. And again, the rate of return, again, less than 1%. The difference in return was within 1 percentage point. So again, decent chunk of money. We're talking about $9,000 or so difference. Not a small sum necessarily, but in the context of the total amount, fairly negligible. Again, rate of return, fairly negligible. So that's the difference in that particular scenario. And when I push this out to even longer scenarios, 20 years, for example, or different time periods, often the difference became even less pronounced. It was a closer amount in ending result and a closer comparison when it came to rate of return. So the difference was fairly negligible. So the moral of the story here with this data that we're looking at is that it's not that big a difference when you're comparing lump sum versus dollar cost averaging, or even just kind of a general monthly contribution like many of us do. The difference is fairly negligible. So what should you do? What wins when it comes to practical applications? I would argue that it's more important to look at the psychological aspect of it than it is to look at the data aspect, because the data shows that the difference, again, is fairly negligible in most practical real world scenarios. So let's look at the psychological differences. So when it comes to lump sum, here are some advantages of investing in big lump sums. One is you'll gain exposure to the markets as soon as possible. So if you have $6,000 in your Roth, or sitting ready for your Roth IRA sitting in your bank account, and it's January, and you're saying, okay, do I want to invest it now or spread it out throughout the month, or spread it throughout the year? I'm sorry. Dumping that in immediately gets you exposure to the markets as soon as possible. It kind of gets you in the market without worrying about the timing or whatever. So it just kind of gets you in there. And when the markets are going up, putting your money to work immediately takes full advantage of that growth. So that could be an advantage. I think it's more important, though, to look at the psychological win you can get from it. So let's say you want to put that full amount in January or beginning of the year. That can enable a feeling of hitting a goal. It can really enable that feeling of, hey, I've checked the box. I've done my investing for the year in my Roth IRA. You can really check that box and feel good about it. And that has value. And you're ensuring that money is locked in and it won't be used for something else. So if you know yourself and you're the kind of person that may be tempted to use that money for something else instead of your investing, let's say you've got $6,000 kind of set aside, but you're like, okay, I'll do a monthly contribution. But then in June, something comes up and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to push pause on that because I'm going to use the money for something else. If you just kind of know you're prone to doing that and you have a pattern of doing that, then it can be really advantageous to do a lump sum at once and just kind of be done with it. You've invested it. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. The box has been checked. You funded your Roth IRA for the year. There's a lot of value in that. That can have some psychological and emotional value. So monthly contributions, by contrast, let's look at the advantages of that. That can have the advantage of being a little bit more of a gradual entry into the market as you're investing. So, let's say hypothetically, you put $6,000 in January, and then the market goes down in February. Well, you might be uncomfortable with that. You might say, well, I just put 6,000 in and now it's worth 5 something. And I feel bad about that. Like, I'm scared. Some people are affected by that. If you would rather not, quote, risk a whole chunk of money at once, and you'd rather do it in even chunks throughout the year, month by month, you're going to be exposed to less visual and perceived volatility. So you're not going to necessarily have this, down or negative feeling about the market affecting your investment so quickly. So that can be psychologically advantageous as well. More importantly, I think it creates a habit. So if you are going to do monthly investing with a set amount every month, I would advise strongly that you put that on autopilot. So whatever investing platform you're using, make sure that you're setting it up so it automatically pulls from your account every month, shoots it over to your Roth IRA, invests like clockwork, and automates it without you having to do anything. It should be an automated transfer that happens without your intervention. That creates this habit and this pattern of investing and saving like clockwork. So again, you want to make sure that you're not, I think the worst possible scenario, or the least helpful scenario in this case, would be to do it as a monthly contribution, but not automated, because then you've got to remember every month. Sometimes it's going to be really easy to skip it. So if you're going to do monthly contributions, I would advise doing it on autopilot with automatic recurring contributions. So those are kind of the pros and cons. Again, the lump sum has the advantage of checking the box, being done for the year, locking the money away. The monthly contribution has the benefit of being psychologically easier to stomach sometimes when markets are volatile. And also creates this cash flow habit of, okay, every month I'm budgeting for this contribution, and it's getting to be a habit, and you're getting to comfortable with that pattern of investing. So what's the bottom line? Again, I promised as we wrap this up, coming full circle, that we would end up in a place that I think would be super helpful, which is that it doesn't really matter very much. So the most important thing is getting the money invested on a regular basis and as soon as possible, and as a pattern of saving. That's really the most important thing. So I want to relieve you of any concern or stress about, when should I invest, or does it matter with monthly or yearly or whatever? The most important thing is creating a pattern of saving and a pattern of investing, and that the money gets in there. That's the most important thing. So I want to reassure you that it doesn't really matter. When it all comes down to it, the data shows that you're not necessarily There's no proof that you're going to be dramatically different in terms of rates of return or ending balances, whether it's annual or monthly or lump sums and so forth. So I'm hoping that relieves you of some stress about worrying about that. Just get the money in there, get it invested periodically and habitually and consistently. That's what really matters. So with that, as always, I would love to hear your feedback. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can go to my website, which is elevationfinancial.com. And I always invite you to book a meeting if you want to, but some people aren't comfortable doing that right away. So if you want to, just send me a note. Just go to my contact form, send me a message through the contact form, or send me an email at podcast@elevationfinancial.com. And I'd be happy to chat. And of course, if you do want to book a meeting, feel free. It is free. I do a complimentary money session with anybody that wants to talk, whether you want to work with me or not. And that's at my website, which is elevationfinancial.com. Again, thanks for joining me today. Have a great day. See you next time.